The penthouse was silent, dangerously silent for a place that housed both a child and New York's most wanted man. Damon's hand moved instinctively toward the Glock beneath his suit jacket. Silence in his world meant ambush or death, but what he heard next made him freeze. Mommy. The word floated through the nursery door. Fragile. Broken. Impossible. Have you ever witnessed a moment so impossible that it shatters everything you thought you knew about miracles? Because what happens next in this penthouse will do exactly that, and the consequences will be more beautiful and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. His hand fell from the gun. Through the gap, he saw his son Julian, paralyzed and silent since birth, sitting in his chair. The boy's eyes were fixed on Isabella Martinez, the black maid from Detroit who'd arrived 4 weeks ago. She knelt on the floor in her uniform, red cleaning gloves bright against the muted room, both hands extended toward Julian like an offering. "That's right, baby," Isabella whispered. "I'm right here." Julian's hand trembled upward, a movement neurologists said would never happen. His mouth struggled, forming shapes that shouldn't be possible. "Mom. My." Damon's back hit the wall. For 3 years, Manhattan's best specialists had declared his son hopeless. Millions spent, doctors from Seoul to Switzerland. Nothing. But now, in his fortress with bulletproof windows and armed guards, the impossible was happening. His son was calling this stranger, hired to clean and fold laundry, Mommy. Isabella hadn't seen him. Her focus stayed on Julian, her face holding pure joy. No fear, no calculation. "Your mama would be so proud," she murmured. The mention of Sora, dead 3 years, blood he couldn't wash away, sent a knife through his chest. He retreated into shadows where he belonged. The word followed. "Mommy. Mommy. Mommy." It echoed like a verdict, like hope. And in his world, hope was the most dangerous weapon. Damon had survived gang wars and assassination attempts, but this one word from his silent son was about to undo him completely. 3 years earlier, Damon had held his newborn son while his wife died on an operating table 6 floors below his penthouse. The emergency C-section had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong, and Sora had bled out before the surgeons could stop it. He'd stood outside the operating room with Julian wrapped in hospital blankets, watching through reinforced glass as they tried to restart her heart. The machines had flatlined, the doctors had stepped back, and Damon had made a choice that would haunt him forever. He'd walked away with his son and never looked back at her body. The guilt had turned to stone inside his chest. Julian's diagnosis came 48 hours later. Severe cerebral palsy, oxygen deprivation during the complicated birth. Paralyzed from the waist down. Nonverbal. The neurologist, a Korean man who'd studied at Johns Hopkins, had delivered the news in careful clinical language that meant one thing: your son will never have a normal life. Damon had responded the only way he knew how. He'd thrown money at the problem. Specialists flew in from Seoul, their credentials impeccable, their promises hollow. Physical therapists from Manhattan's most exclusive practices came and went, their optimism fading after months of zero progress. He'd had the penthouse renovated, medical equipment installed in every room, ramps built, specialized furniture imported from Germany. The nursery looked more like an intensive care unit than a child's room. None of it worked. Julian remained locked inside himself, his dark eyes staring at nothing, his small body unresponsive to every technique, every treatment, every desperate attempt to reach him. The penthouse became a fortress, bulletproof glass on every window, armed guards rotating shifts at every entrance, security cameras in every hallway except Julian's room. Damon had drawn the line there, though he couldn't say why. Maybe because watching his son's stillness on a monitor felt like admitting defeat. His world outside these walls was violence and territory. Koreatown operations that stretched from Flushing to Midtown. Protection rackets that kept neighborhood businesses safe for a price. Shipments that moved through ports his organization controlled. Damon had built his empire on calculated risk and absolute loyalty, and it had made him one of the most feared men in New York's Korean underworld. But power meant nothing when his son couldn't recognize his face. He'd learned to compartmentalize. Business happened in his office or in the backs of restaurants where his word was law. Fatherhood happened in stolen moments when he'd sit beside Julian's chair and talk to him about nothing, knowing the boy couldn't understand. The two worlds never touched. Grief became strategy. Loss became control. He'd turned his pain into an empire because empires didn't bleed. Winston had been there through all of it. His lieutenant, his right hand, the man who'd stood beside him for 8 years through territorial wars and federal investigations. Winston was sharp, efficient, and utterly loyal. Or so Damon had believed. He was always in the shadows during meetings, always watching, always ready to execute orders without question. When Sora died, Winston had helped arrange the funeral, kept the business running, made sure Damon didn't fall apart publicly. "You need staff," Winston had said 4 weeks ago, his tone neutral. "Someone to help with the boy. The nurses aren't enough." Damon had nodded, distracted by reports of a rival gang moving into their territory. Find someone discreet, someone who won't ask questions. Winston had handled it. He always handled things. Isabella Martinez had arrived on a Tuesday morning with a single suitcase and references from Detroit that Damon hadn't bothered to verify. She was younger than the other staff, mid-20s maybe, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun, and an expression that suggested she'd seen worse than armed men in expensive suits. She'd nodded at the security protocols, signed the NDAs without reading them, and started work immediately. Damon had barely noticed her. She was just another person in a penthouse full of people who moved through his life like ghosts. Necessary, but invisible. He'd been wrong about that. Now, standing in the hallway with his son's impossible words still ringing in his ears, Damon realized he'd missed something crucial. While he'd been building walls, Isabella had been breaking through them. While he'd been drowning in grief, she'd been teaching his son to speak. The question that terrified him wasn't how she'd done it. It was why someone like her, someone with no connection to his world, no reason to care about a paralyzed boy in a fortress, had succeeded where everyone else had failed. If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, if this story has already grabbed hold of your heart, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what Isabella does next, what she uncovers in that penthouse, is going to change everything you think you know about healing and hope. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles still happen in the darkest places. Now let's see what happens when Damon finally confronts her. Damon didn't sleep. He'd spent the night in his office replaying the moment on an endless loop. The word, the reaching. The way Julian's eyes had tracked Isabella like she was the only real thing in his world. By dawn, the city stretched beneath his windows in shades of gray and gold, oblivious to the storm building inside him. His encrypted phone had buzzed with messages all night, territory disputes, shipment schedules, problems that required his attention. He'd ignored everyone. At 7 a.m., he sent a message to Winston. "Bring the maid to my office." The response came immediately. "Now? Now." 20 minutes later, there was a knock. Winston entered first, his expression unreadable. Isabella followed, still wearing her uniform, her red gloves tucked into her apron pocket. She looked tired, but not afraid. That should have been his first clue. "Close the door," Damon said. His voice came out harder than he'd intended. Winston obeyed, then positioned himself near the window, his usual spot during interrogations. Damon gestured for Isabella to sit in the chair across from his desk. She sat, her posture straight, hands folded in her lap. The office smelled of leather, whiskey, and the gun oil he used religiously. It was a room designed to intimidate, with dark wood and minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The Glock in his desk drawer was loaded. The one under his jacket was always within reach. Isabella looked at him with steady brown eyes that held no fear, only curiosity. "What did you do to my son?" The question came out like an accusation. She didn't flinch. "I talked to him." "Talked?" "Yes, sir." Damon leaned forward, his fingers interlaced on the desk. "For 3 years, The best specialists in Manhattan have told me my son can't understand language. His brain doesn't process speech. He's locked inside himself. His voice dropped. And you're telling me you just talked to him? I talked to him like he could understand, Isabella said calmly. Because he can. The simplicity of it was insulting. I've hired neurologists from Korea, therapists who studied at the best universities in the world. I've spent millions. Maybe the best isn't what he needed, Isabella interrupted, her voice still gentle but firm. Maybe he just needed someone who wasn't afraid of the silence. The words hit him like a physical blow. Winston shifted slightly by the window, his expression unreadable. Damon's jaw tightened. You're a maid. You clean floors. You have no medical training, no credentials, no right to— I have eyes, Isabella said. And I have time. That's all it took. Time? He wanted to throw something. Instead, he gripped the edge of his desk. I've given him 3 years. You've given him money, she said quietly. That's not the same thing. The silence that followed was volcanic. Winston's hand moved slightly toward his jacket, a protective instinct Damon recognized, but Damon raised one finger. Stand down. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for that boy, Damon said, his voice low and dangerous. You're right. I don't. Isabella's gaze didn't waver. But Julian knows. And he's been waiting for someone to see him as more than a diagnosis. Damon stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He turned to face the window, his back to both of them. The city sprawled below, his territory, his kingdom. From here, he controlled thousands of lives. He made decisions that could end careers and bloodlines, but he couldn't control this woman's quiet defiance. What exactly have you been doing with him? He asked without turning. Reading, singing, holding his hand when he gets scared. Her voice was steady. I talk to him about his mother. I tell him stories about Detroit. I ask him questions even though he can't answer yet. Yet. He will. He's already started. Damon turned back to face her. The word he said yesterday. Mommy. Yes, sir. He's been practicing for days. It's hard for him. His muscles don't cooperate. But he's trying. Why that word? The question tore out of him. Why not? Why not something else? Isabella's expression softened. Because I told him about my mama, how she worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, how she never gave up on me even when things got hard. She paused. I think he understood what that meant. Someone who shows up. Someone who stays. The implication was clear. Unlike you. Winston spoke for the first time, his tone careful. Sir, perhaps we should consult with Dr. Kim before— No. Damon's voice was flat. He looked at Isabella. You were hired to clean. That's your job description. Yes, sir. You are not authorized to treat my son. I'm not treating him. I'm talking to him. Don't do anything with him without my permission. Isabella stood slowly. With respect, sir, I'll keep doing what I've been doing, because it's working, and if you want me to stop, you'll have to fire me. The audacity of it stunned him. In his world, people didn't talk back. They obeyed, or they disappeared. But this woman from Detroit, with no protection and no power, was standing in his office and drawing a line he couldn't cross without becoming the monster everyone thought he was. Winston's hand moved again, closer to his jacket. Damon shook his head once. No. Get out, he said to Isabella. She nodded, turned, and walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when he spoke again. If anything happens to him— Nothing will happen to him, Isabella said without looking back. I promise you that. She left. The door closed with a soft click. Winston waited a beat, then said, Sir, she's insubordinate. We should nothing. Damon sat back down, suddenly exhausted. She got my son to speak, Winston. Something no one else could do. That doesn't mean we can trust her. I don't trust anyone. He looked up at his lieutenant. But I'm going to give her a chance. Because if there's even a possibility she can reach him. Winston's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. Assessment. Understood, sir. After he left, Damon sat alone in his office, staring at the door Isabella had walked through. His world was built on control, on knowing every variable, every threat, every weakness. But this woman had become a variable he couldn't calculate, and that terrified him more than any rival gang ever could. 2 days later, Damon set up a test. He needed to see it for himself. Not through a cracked door, not from the shadows, but directly. If Isabella had genuinely reached his son, he had to know how. And if this was some kind of manipulation, some angle he hadn't identified yet, he needed to know that too. He had Julian brought to the main living area, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The furniture was modern and expensive, chosen by an interior designer Sora had hired before she died. Everything was white and gray and cold. The medical staff assembled. 2 nurses who'd been with Julian since birth, a physical therapist who came 3 times a week, and Dr. Kim, the neurologist who delivered the original diagnosis. Winston stood by the entrance, arms crossed, watching everything. Julian sat in his specialized chair, his small body supported by custom cushioning. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing in particular. He wore a blue shirt that made his skin look pale. Damon stood 10 feet away, observing. "Julian," Dr. Kim said gently, kneeling in front of the chair. "Can you look at me?" Nothing. The boy's gaze didn't shift. Dr. Kim glanced at Damon, his expression apologetic, then tried again. "Julian, it's Dr. Kim. Can you show me your hand?" Still nothing. One of the nurses stepped forward with a colorful toy, something with buttons that made noise. She pressed one and a cheerful melody played. "Julian, sweetie, look at this. Isn't it fun?" The boy's eyes remained distant. The physical therapist tried next, using techniques Damon had watched fail 100 times before. Gentle touches, soft encouragement, questions designed to elicit any response. Julian might as well have been alone in the room. Damon felt the familiar weight settling in his chest. The confirmation that nothing had changed, that yesterday had been a fluke, a moment of wishful thinking. Then he said, "Bring in Isabella." Winston moved to the intercom, spoke quietly. A minute later, Isabella entered through the main doorway. She was still in her uniform, her red gloves tucked away. She looked at the assembled medical staff with mild surprise, then at Julian. Her entire demeanor changed. She walked directly to the boy, not hurried, but purposeful. She knelt beside his chair, not in front of him like Dr. Kim had, but beside him, at his level. "Hey, baby," she said softly, her Detroit accent warm and unhurried. "I didn't know we were having a party today." Julian's eyes moved. Just slightly, but they moved, tracking toward her voice. The room went completely still. Isabella reached out and gently touched his hand. "You doing okay? All these people making you nervous?" Julian's fingers twitched. Then his mouth moved, struggling to form a shape. "Take your time," Isabella murmured. "Ain't nobody rushing you." Then, in halting Korean that she'd clearly been practicing, she said, "Iyama's here." Julian's face transformed. His lips pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile but was close enough to break Damon's heart. A small sound came from his throat. Not a word, but an attempt at one. Isabella smiled, and it was genuine, full of pride. "That's right. You're doing so good." Dr. Kim leaned forward, his professional mask slipping into something like wonder. I've never seen him respond like this." "He responds when he feels safe," Isabella said, not looking away from Julian. She switched back to English, her voice gentle. "Don't you, sweetheart? You just needed somebody who wasn't afraid to wait." Julian made another sound, this one closer to a syllable. His right hand lifted slightly, trembling with effort, reaching toward Isabella's face. She didn't move. She let him touch her cheek, his small fingers brushing her skin. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm always going to be here." Damon couldn't breathe. He'd spent 3 years watching his son exist in a void, unreachable and unreached. And now, In his own living room, with medical staff who'd declared the situation hopeless, Julian was present, responding, trying. Winston's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Damon recognized that look. It was the expression Winston wore when identifying a weakness in enemy territory. But this wasn't enemy territory. This was his son. His family. "Dr. Kim," Damon said, his voice rougher than intended. "Your assessment?" The neurologist stood slowly, his gaze still fixed on Julian and Isabella. "This contradicts everything we understood about his condition." He's tracking her voice, responding to her presence, attempting vocalization. "It's..." He paused, searching for words. "It's medically improbable. But it's happening." One of the nurses said quietly, "It's a miracle." "Yes." Dr. Kim looked at Damon. "It's happening." Damon walked closer, each step measured. Isabella glanced up at him, her expression calm but watchful. Julian's attention remained on her, but when Damon knelt beside them, the boy's eyes shifted slightly, acknowledging his father's presence for the first time Damon could remember. "He doesn't need another doctor," Damon said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "He needs someone who sees him as more than a diagnosis." Isabella's eyes met his. "He needs someone who believes he's worth the time it takes." The implication stung because it was true. Damon had spent 3 years throwing money at specialists while keeping emotional distance from his son. He'd told himself it was necessary, that getting too close would break him, that staying detached was the only way to survive the grief. But Isabella had done the opposite. She'd gotten close. She'd invested time without expecting results. And somehow, impossibly, it had worked. "You can stay with him," Damon said, unsupervised. "Whatever time you need." "Thank you, sir. But..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to be here sometimes. When you're working with him. I want to learn what you're doing." Isabella's expression softened. He'd like that, having his appa here. The Korean word for father hit him harder than he expected. Winston shifted by the door. A small movement, but Damon caught it. His lieutenant was filing this away, adding it to whatever calculations were running behind those sharp eyes. Let him calculate, Damon thought. For the first time in 3 years, his son had smiled. Everything else could wait. Late that evening, after the medical staff had left and Winston had departed for business in Queens, Damon sat in his office trying to focus on reports from their Flushing operations. The numbers blurred together. His mind kept returning to the living room, to Julian's attempt at speech, to the way Isabella had known exactly how to reach him. Then he heard it. Singing. Soft and distant, floating down the hallway from Julian's room. The melody stopped him cold. It was Korean, a lullaby he hadn't heard in 3 years. Not since Sora had sung it, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, her voice sweet and slightly off-key. Damon stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. He moved down the hallway without thinking, drawn by the sound of his dead wife's song coming from a woman who shouldn't know it. Julian's door was half open. Soft light spilled into the hallway. He stopped at the threshold. Isabella sat in the rocking chair beside Julian's crib-style bed, holding a small leather-bound journal. She was reading from it, singing in halting Korean, her pronunciation careful but imperfect. The words were right, but her accent marked her as someone learning a language that wasn't hers. Ja Uriya. Sleep. Sleep, my baby. Julian lay in his bed, eyes half closed, but his lips were moving, trying to follow the melody. Damon's hand gripped the doorframe. He knew that journal. He'd bought it for Sora when she was 6 months pregnant, had it custom made with her initials embossed on the cover. She'd filled it with notes about the baby, recipes she wanted to try, lullabies she was learning from her mother in Seoul. After she died, he'd told the staff to pack everything away. He couldn't bear to see her handwriting, her plans for a future that would never happen. He'd thought everything was gone, donated or stored in a facility he never intended to visit. But Isabella was holding it, reading from it, singing Sora's song to their son. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out harsher than he meant. Isabella looked up, startled but not afraid. I found it behind the medical equipment when I was cleaning. It was wedged between the wall and the oxygen tank. Damon stepped into the room. That belonged to my wife. I know. Isabella closed the journal carefully, holding it out to him. I'm sorry. I should have asked before using it. When I found it and saw the songs, I thought Julian should hear them. He took the journal with trembling hands. The leather was worn at the edges, the pages slightly yellowed. He opened it to a random page and saw Sora's slanted handwriting, her notes in a mix of Korean and English. Baby kicks so much at night. He's going to be a soccer player. Damon felt him yesterday and almost cried. He pretends to be tough. But I know he's soft inside. Our son will teach him that. The words blurred. Damon blinked hard, forcing the tears back. He turned to another page and found the lullabies. Sora had written them out phonetically in English letters for someone who didn't read Hangul, with notes in the margins. Sing this when he's scared. This one helps with sleep. This one is for when I'm not there. For when I'm not there. She'd known. Somehow, even before the emergency, before the complications, Sora had known she might not survive. And she'd left instructions for caring for their son in her absence. She loved him so much, Isabella said softly. You can tell from every page. She wanted him to know her voice. Even if she wasn't here to sing it herself, Damon finished. Isabella nodded. I've been using a translation app to learn them. My pronunciation is terrible, but Julian doesn't seem to mind. Damon looked at his son. The boy's eyes were on him now, really seeing him, maybe for the first time. You're singing her songs to him. His voice cracked. You're giving him his mother's voice even though you never met her. He deserves to know her, Isabella said, even if it comes through someone else. Damon sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. His hand found Julian's small one, and for once, the boy didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers curled slightly around Damon's thumb. The gesture broke something inside him. She would have loved you for this, he whispered. Isabella smiled gently. She loved him. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Julian's steady breathing. Then the boy made a small noise. Not quite a word, but an attempt. His mouth moved, struggling with the shape, and then it came out, barely audible but unmistakable. Iama. The Korean word for mother. Damon's breath caught. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. That's right. Iama. Your mama loved you so much. Julian's gaze moved to Damon, then back to Isabella, as if making a connection. This is my father. You're teaching me about my mother. She used to sing to you before you were born, Damon said, his voice thick. Every night she'd sit in this room and talk to you like you could already hear her. He can hear now, Isabella said. He's listening to both of you. Damon looked at this woman, this stranger who'd walked into his fortress with nothing but a suitcase and somehow found a piece of his wife he thought was lost forever. She'd taken Sora's words and breathed life into them, giving their son the mother's love he'd been denied. I spent 3 years trying to forget her, he admitted. I packed everything away, because remembering hurt too much. I thought if I erased her from the house, I could function, keep going. But you can't erase love, Isabella said. It finds a way back. It always does. She was right. Sora's love was in this journal, in these lullabies, in the way Julian responded to her voice. Even though she'd never held him outside the womb, even though she'd died bringing him into the world, her love didn't die with the body. It lingered in words and songs and the spaces between heartbeats. Teach me, Damon said suddenly. Isabella looked at him, surprised. The songs. Teach me how to sing them the way she wrote them. I need to be the one singing to him. Isabella's smile was warm and knowing. He'd love that. Let's start with this one. She opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. It's called Ioma wi Mayum, Mother's Heart. They spent the next hour learning it together. Isabella reading Sora's phonetic notes, Damon correcting pronunciation. both of them fumbling through the melody until it started to sound right. Julian watched them with wide eyes, his small body relaxed in a way Damon had never seen before. By the time they finished, it was past midnight. Julian had fallen asleep with a peaceful expression, his breathing steady and calm. Damon stood, still holding the journal. "Thank you," he said to Isabella, "for finding this, for caring enough to use it." "He's worth it," Isabella said simply. As Damon walked back to his office, the journal pressed against his chest. He felt something shifting inside him. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But for the first time since Sora's death, he felt connected to his son. Not through expensive treatments or medical interventions, but through the simple act of learning his mother's songs. Isabella had done that. A maid from Detroit with no training and no reason to care had given him back a piece of his family. And that realization was both beautiful and terrifying. If this story is hitting you in the heart right now, if you're feeling the weight of what's happening in this penthouse, hit that like button. Because what happens next? The darkness that's about to descend on this family, you need to be here for it. Drop a comment below. Team Isabella or Team Damon? Who's inspiring you more? And subscribe, because this journey is just beginning. Now let's see what's lurking in the shadows. Winston had been Damon's second-in-command for 8 years. He'd started as an enforcer, good with his hands, better with a gun, smart enough to understand strategy. Over time, Damon had promoted him, trusted him with operations that required discretion and ruthlessness in equal measure. Winston had never disappointed. Until recently? It wasn't that Winston had changed, it was that Damon had changed, or rather, was beginning to change. And Winston saw it as weakness. He sat in his car outside a restaurant in Flushing, watching Damon's territory through the windshield. This was the heart of their operation. Restaurants, karaoke bars, massage parlors that were fronts for more lucrative businesses. Money flowed through these streets like blood through veins, and Winston knew every pathway. He also knew how vulnerable it had become. Damon was distracted. The boss who used to respond to threats within hours now took days. The man who'd once executed a rival for insulting him now spent evenings in his son's nursery, learning lullabies from a maid. It was pathetic. And it was an opportunity. Winston's phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. Tonight. Usual place. He started the car. 20 minutes later, he was in a warehouse on the edge of Queens, neutral territory. Technically outside both organizations' control. The Jiang gang had requested this meeting 3 weeks ago, and Winston had been careful to keep it hidden from Damon. 3 men waited inside. The leader, Park Jin-ho, was roughly Winston's age, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. His reputation was brutal, even by their world's standards. "You're late," Park said in Korean. "I had to make sure I wasn't followed." Winston stopped 10 feet away, keeping distance. "What do you want?" Park smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "We want what you want. Damon's territory." "And why would I want that?" "Because you've been his dog for 8 years, and you're tired of begging for scraps." Park lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the warehouse's dim light. "We've been watching. Your boss is weak now. That crippled kid has made him soft." Winston's expression didn't change, but inside, his mind raced. Park was right, but admitting it out loud was dangerous. Damon's not weak. He's strategic. He's broken. Park stepped closer. His wife died. His son's useless. And now he's falling apart over a maid. We've seen the reports. He's spending less time managing operations and more time playing house. "What's your offer?" Park's smile widened. "Help us remove him. We split the territory. You get Koreatown, we get the ports. Everyone profits except Damon. He'll be dead or locked up. Doesn't matter which." Winston considered this. He'd spent years building loyalty, earning trust, positioning himself as indispensable. Betraying Damon now would mean severing every connection he'd cultivated, but it would also mean ascending to power he'd never achieve otherwise. Damon would never step down, never retire, never make Winston an equal partner. The only way up was through betrayal. "I'll need time," Winston said carefully. "His security is tight. His people are loyal. We don't have time. Every day he recovers emotionally is a day we lose advantage. Park flicked Ash on the floor. We need him vulnerable, distracted. He already is. Then make him more so. Park's eyes glinted. That Maid. She's his weak point now. Use her. Winston nodded slowly. Give me 2 weeks. You have one. Park turned to leave, then paused. Don't disappoint us, Winston. We're not as forgiving as Damon. Back at the penthouse, something was happening in Julian's room. Winston could hear it from the hallway as he returned from Queens. Excited voices, movement, something that sounded like celebration. He found Damon standing in the doorway, his hand covering his mouth, shoulders shaking. Inside, Isabella knelt beside Julian's chair. The boy's hand was extended toward her, trembling with effort. His mouth moved, forming shapes that had never come before. B. The sound struggled out. B. That's it, baby, Isabella whispered, her eyes bright. You got it. Say my name. Julian's face scrunched with concentration, then, clear as morning light. Bella? Damon made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob. He stumbled into the room, dropping to his knees beside his son's chair. You said her name. Julian. You said her name. Julian turned to his father, recognition bright in his eyes. He said it again, stronger this time. Bella. Winston watched from the doorway, his face carefully neutral. Inside, he was calculating. This wasn't just progress. This was attachment. Dependency. This was exactly what Park needed. Damon pulled Isabella into an embrace. Inappropriate. Unprofessional. Completely unlike him. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, her arms coming up to return it. He's finding his voice, she said softly, because you gave him space to try. When they separated, Damon's face was wet. He didn't bother wiping it. Tell me about your mother, he said suddenly. Isabella blinked, surprised. Sir, your mother. You told Julian about her. I want to know. They sat together on the floor while Julian dozed in his chair, exhausted from the effort of speaking. Isabella's voice was quiet, almost hesitant at first, then gaining strength. Her name is Rosa. She raised me alone in Detroit East Side, where you don't walk after dark if you can help it. She worked 3 jobs most of my life. Maid service during the day, hotel cleaning at night, weekend shifts at a laundromat. Isabella's hands twisted in her lap. I used to beg her to rest. She'd say, baby, love is showing up every single day, even when you're tired, especially when you're tired. She sounds strong, Damon said. She is. She taught me that the world's going to try to make you invisible, going to act like you don't matter because of where you're from or what you look like, but you matter anyway. You show up anyway. Isabella looked at Julian. That's what I see when I look at him. Someone the world tried to make invisible. But he matters. He's always mattered. Damon's chest tightened. You came here for her. To send money back. To send money back so she could finally rest. So she wouldn't have to work herself to death just to survive. Isabella met his eyes. That's why I took this job. The pay was... It was more than I'd make in Detroit in 2 years. You're underpaid, Damon said flatly. I'll triple it. Sir. You gave my son his voice back. You brought my wife's songs into his life. You... He stopped. Something dangerous and vulnerable crossing his face. You made me remember what it feels like to hope. The silence stretched between them. Winston, still in the doorway, saw it clearly. The way Damon looked at Isabella wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper. Something that made a man stupid. Perfect. I should let you rest, Isabella said, standing. It's late. Damon caught her hand. The touch lasted a second too long. Thank you. For everything. When she left, Damon stayed on the floor beside his son, watching him sleep. Winston finally stepped into the room. Sir, he said carefully. The flushing situation requires your attention. It can wait. The shipment... I said it can wait. Damon's voice was sharp, then softer. Did you see him, Winston? He said her name. I saw. Winston kept his tone neutral. It's remarkable progress. It's a miracle. Winston nodded. Said nothing more. He didn't need to. The trap was already closing. Damon had fallen in love with his son's healing, with the woman making it happen, with the fantasy that his broken family could somehow be whole again. Men in love made mistakes. They prioritized feelings over strategy. They left themselves exposed. Winston left the room and pulled out his burner phone. One message to Park. 1 week. Start preparations. In Julian's room, Damon sat in the darkness, unaware that his most trusted lieutenant had just signed his death warrant. The envelope appeared 3 days later, slipped under Isabella's door sometime after midnight. She found it when she woke at dawn, a plain manila rectangle on the hardwood floor. No markings, no return address, just her name written in block letters across the front. Her hand shook as she opened it. The photograph inside stole her breath. Her mother, Rosa, standing outside their Detroit apartment building. The image was recent. Her mother wore the blue jacket Isabella had sent her last month. She was carrying grocery bags, mid-step, completely unaware she was being watched. Someone had drawn a red crosshair over her face. The note was typed, impersonal. Leave New York or she dies. You have 48 hours. Isabella's knees gave out. She sat hard on the floor, the photograph trembling in her hands. The world narrowed to that red crosshair, that threat, the impossible choice being forced on her. She thought about running, getting on the first flight to Detroit, grabbing her mother, disappearing into another city where no one knew them. But she'd seen enough of Damon's world to know that running wouldn't work. If someone wanted her gone badly enough to threaten her mother, they'd find them anywhere. For 20 minutes, she sat frozen. Then Julian's morning sounds came through the wall, the small noises he made when he was waking up, calling for her in his limited way. She couldn't let him see her like this. Couldn't let fear win. Isabella hid the photograph in her pocket and went to Julian's room. She got him dressed, fed him breakfast, sang the lullabies he loved. But her hands shook on the spoon. Her voice cracked on the high notes. Julian noticed. His small hand reached for her face, concerned. Bella? She forced a smile. I'm okay, baby. Just tired. But she wasn't okay. And by mid-morning, she knew she had to tell Damon. She found him in his office, staring at reports he wasn't reading. When she knocked, he looked up with an expression that shifted immediately to concern. What's wrong? Isabella closed the door behind her. Her hand shook as she pulled out the envelope. Someone left this under my door. Damon took it, his face hardening as he processed what he was seeing. The photograph, the crosshair, the threat. When he spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. Who knows you're here? I don't know. I didn't tell anyone except my mother. I didn't. Her voice broke. Mr. Sun, if something happens to her, nothing will happen to her. Damon was already on his phone, speaking rapid Korean. Orders, locations, arrangements she couldn't follow. When he finished, he looked at her directly. I'm sending protection to Detroit. 4 men. Armed. Trained. They'll be at your mother's apartment within 2 hours. I need to leave, Isabella said. If I'm gone, they'll... No. The word was absolute. You're not leaving. This is my mother. And this is my problem to solve. Damon stood, moving around the desk toward her. Someone in my organization leaked information. Someone on my payroll put a target on your mother's back. That means this is an inside threat. And I will handle it. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. You can't just decide. I can and I will. His eyes were hard, but underneath was something else. Fear. You leave now and Julian loses the only person who's reached him in 3 years. You think I'll let that happen? You think I'll let anyone take you from him? What about what I want? What about my choice? Your choice is to trust me. Damon's voice softened slightly. I know you don't owe me that trust, but I'm asking for it anyway. Stay. Let me protect your mother. Let me find whoever did this. Isabella wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to be anywhere but trapped between these impossible options. But she looked at Damon's face and saw something she recognized: the desperation of a parent who'd do anything to protect their child. He was protecting Julian. But maybe, she realized, he was also trying to protect her. If anything happens to her, it won't, Damon promised. I swear to you, Isabella, on my son's life, nothing will happen to your mother. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Damon made more calls. Winston appeared within minutes, his face professionally concerned as Damon showed him the photograph. Find out who did this, Damon ordered. Check everyone who has access to staff information, security footage from the past week. I want names by tonight. Yes, sir. Winston's eyes flickered to Isabella, then away. Should we increase security on the penthouse? Double it. No one gets in without my personal approval. After Winston left, Isabella said quietly, I should get back to Julian. Wait. Damon caught her arm gently. I meant what I said. You're not alone in this. Something in his touch, in his voice, made her eyes sting. She'd spent her whole life being alone, figuring things out by herself. Having someone say you're not alone felt like a wound and a healing at the same time. Why do you care? She asked. I'm just the maid. You're not just anything. Damon's grip tightened slightly. You're the reason my son is speaking. You're the reason I can look at him without drowning in guilt. He stopped, seeming to catch himself. I'm what? You're important, he finished. To this family. Don't forget that. When Isabella returned to Julian's room, the boy was agitated. He'd sensed something wrong, the way children do. His hands moved restlessly, his eyes searching her face. Bella scared? He asked in his halting way. She knelt beside him, forcing calm into her voice. A little bit, baby, but I'm okay. Stay. His hand gripped hers. Bella, stay. The question broke her. I'm trying, sweetheart. I'm trying so hard to stay. But even as she said it, Isabella felt the walls closing in. Someone wanted her gone badly enough to threaten murder. And no amount of armed guards could change one simple truth. As long as she stayed in this penthouse, her mother was a target. The cost of love, she realized, was sometimes having to choose who to save. And she didn't know if she could make that choice. Damon's intelligence network moved like a machine. Within 24 hours, his people had traced the envelope's delivery route, pulled security footage from Isabella's hallway, and started analyzing communication patterns within his organization. The answer came 2 days after the threat arrived, delivered by a junior lieutenant Damon had known for 5 years. Sir, the man said, his voice tight with nerves. You need to see this. Damon looked at the laptop screen. Encrypted messages decoded by his tech people. Offshore accounts opened 3 weeks ago, meeting locations in Queens warehouses, and one name that appeared in every transaction, every conversation, every piece of evidence. Winston. Damon stared at the screen until the words blurred. His right hand. His brother. The man who'd stood beside him through territorial wars and federal raids. The man he'd trusted with his life, with his operations, with everything that mattered. Betrayal felt like a blade between his ribs, slow and precise. Who else knows? Damon's voice came out flat. Just me and the tech team, sir. 3 people total. Keep it that way. Damon closed the laptop. I want surveillance on Winston. Everything. Where he goes. Who he talks to. What he eats for lunch. I want to know before he knows. Yes, sir. And say nothing to anyone, especially Winston. After the lieutenant left, Damon sat alone in his office, staring at nothing. 8 years. 8 years of loyalty, partnership, brotherhood. All of it a lie. Or maybe not a lie. Maybe just conditional. Loyalty that lasted only as long as Winston saw benefit in it. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. The worst part was that Damon understood it. In this world, ambition was currency. Weakness was death. And Damon had shown weakness by caring about his son, by letting Isabella into their lives, by choosing family over empire even for a moment. Winston had seen that weakness and decided to exploit it. Damon's phone buzzed. A video file from a blocked number. His blood turned cold. The footage showed a warehouse. Concrete floors, metal beams, shadows in every corner. In the center, tied to a chair, was an older black woman with silver-threaded hair. She'd been beaten. Her lip was split, one eye swollen shut. But her chin was up, defiant even in restraint. Rosa. Isabella's mother. A voice spoke in Korean, the audio distorted. The maid leaves tonight or the mother dies at dawn. No more warnings. The video ended. Damon was moving before he finished watching. He found Isabella in Julian's room, reading from Sora's journal. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her stand immediately. What happened? He showed her the video, watched the color drain from her face, watched her legs buckle. He caught her before she fell. "Mama," Isabella whispered. "Oh God. Mama." "Listen to me," Damon said urgently. "I know where they're holding her. I have people tracking the video's origin right now. We will get her back." "They said I have to leave tonight." "You're not leaving." Damon's hands gripped her shoulders. "And your mother isn't dying. I'm going to end this. All of it. Trust me." But Isabella was already shaking her head. "You can't stop them. If they want me gone, the only way to save her is to go." "Isabella." "I have to." She pulled away from him, her decision made. "I won't let her die, because I was too afraid to leave." Damon wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the penthouse and solve this his way. But he saw the determination in her eyes, the same strength that had reached his son when no one else could. Isabella Martinez didn't run from fear. She ran toward the people she loved. Consequences be damned. "Give me 6 hours," he said. 6 hours before you go anywhere. Let me try." "Damon?" 6 hours, Isabella, please." She hesitated, then nodded. 6 hours. Then I'm leaving, with or without your permission. After she left, Damon made a call. "Bring Winston to my office now." His lieutenant arrived 10 minutes later, concern perfectly painted on his face. "Sir, the video. I saw it. We're working on—" "Sit down." Something in Damon's tone made Winston pause. He sat slowly, his hand moving slightly toward his jacket. Damon leaned back in his chair, studying the man he'd trusted for 8 years. "How long have you been working with Jay Yang?" Winston's face went carefully blank. "Sir, don't insult me." Damon's voice was cold. "I know about the meetings, the offshore accounts, the plan to split my territory." He paused. "I know everything." For 3 seconds, Winston maintained the pretense. Then his expression shifted, the mask dropping away to reveal something calculating and merciless. "You went soft," Winston said simply. "The moment that maid walked in, you stopped being a boss and started being a father. Weakness in this business is death. So you decided to kill me first. I decided to take what should have been mine 8 years ago." Winston stood slowly. "You made me your second, but never your equal. Never your partner. I've earned that right." "By threatening an innocent woman?" Damon's hand moved toward his desk drawer. "By using the only leverage that works against you now." Winston's hand was inside his jacket now, fingers on metal. "You made yourself vulnerable, Damon. I'm just smart enough to see it." "You're smart enough to die for it." Winston drew his weapon. Damon was faster. The first shot missed. Winston dove behind the leather chair. The second shattered the window. Glass exploded inward as armed guards burst through the office door. But Winston was already moving, firing twice to cover his escape. Damon pursued into the hallway, but Winston had a head start and knowledge of every exit, every camera blind spot. By the time Damon reached the emergency stairs, his lieutenant was gone. "Lock down the building," Damon ordered the guards. "Find him." But he knew Winston was already gone, smart, prepared. Always 3 moves ahead. The betrayal wasn't impulsive, it was calculated, and Winston had planned his escape as carefully as he'd planned the coup. Damon returned to his office, his phone already ringing with the location trace from the video. A warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Abandoned. Isolated. Perfect for a hostage situation. He had 3 hours before dawn. Before the deadline. Before they killed Rosa and forced Isabella into whatever trap they'd prepared. 3 hours to wage war. He started making calls. Not to Winston's crew. They were compromised. But to the men who'd served with him before Winston arrived. The ones who'd loved Sora, who'd watched Julian suffer, who'd stayed loyal not out of fear, but out of respect. He needed soldiers he could trust. Because this wasn't just business anymore. This was family. And he'd burn the entire city down before he let them take another person he loved. The warehouse in Red Hook looked abandoned from the outside. Rusted metal, broken windows. Decades of neglect. But Damon's intelligence confirmed what he needed to know. Jae-young had 12 men inside, armed and expecting trouble. Rosa was being held in the northwest corner, still alive, but injured. Winston hadn't been spotted, but his phone had pinged from a location 2 blocks away an hour ago. He was watching, waiting to see how this played out. Damon assembled his crew in the shadow of a shipping container 300 yards from the warehouse. 8 men, all veterans of territorial wars, all carrying grudges against Jae-young that went back years. They wore dark clothes and grim expressions, checking weapons with practiced efficiency. Isabella insisted on coming. Damon had tried to refuse, but she'd looked at him with steel in her eyes and said, "That's my mother. I'm not waiting in a car while you decide her fate." Now she stood beside him, wearing a borrowed tactical vest, her hands steady despite the fear he knew she felt. She'd left Julian with the most trusted nurse, kissing him goodbye with promises she might not be able to keep. "When we go in," Damon said quietly, "you stay behind me. Always. I know how to handle myself. I don't doubt it. But if something happens to you, my son will never forgive me." He paused. "And neither will I." Isabella nodded, her jaw tight. Damon checked his watch. 3 a.m. Dawn was still hours away, but he wasn't waiting for their deadline. The element of surprise was the only advantage he had. He gave the signal. They moved in 3 teams, 2 flanking groups through the side entrances. Damon's team straight through the front. The warehouse door was locked but not reinforced. One of his men placed a small charge. The explosion tore through the silence like thunder. Inside was chaos. Jae-young's men had been expecting an attack, but not this fast, not this aggressive. Damon's crew moved like a machine, clearing corners with brutal efficiency. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness. Someone screamed. Metal clanged against concrete. Damon pushed forward, Isabella close behind him. His focus narrowed to one goal: find Rosa. A Jae-young enforcer appeared from behind a stack of crates, weapon raised. Damon fired twice, center mass, clean kill. The man dropped. Isabella didn't flinch, stepping over the body without hesitation. She'd seen worse in Detroit, Damon realized. This world wasn't foreign to her, just a different version of the violence she'd survived before. They found Rosa in a back room, exactly where intelligence said she'd be. She was conscious but weak. Blood dried on her temple. When she saw Isabella, relief flooded her battered face. "Baby," Rosa whispered. Isabella ran to her, working at the ropes binding her wrists. "I'm here, Mama. I'm here." Damon covered the door while Isabella freed her mother. Outside, the gunfight was intensifying. He could hear his men calling positions, coordinating movements. Jae-young was outnumbered, but not outgunned. Then Winston's voice cut through the chaos, amplified by a megaphone from somewhere outside the warehouse. "Damon, walk out now, and I'll let the women leave alive." Damon's grip tightened on his weapon. "Get her up," he told Isabella. "We're moving." They emerged from the back room into a scene of carnage, bodies on the floor, 3 of Jae-young's men, 1 of his own. Blood pooled on concrete. Smoke from discharged weapons hung in the air like fog. Winston stood near the main entrance, flanked by 4 Jae-young enforcers. He held a pistol loosely, pointed at the floor. His expression was calm, almost regretful. "This didn't have to get bloody," Winston said in Korean. You could have stepped down quietly, retired, lived. Lived as what? Damon replied in English, his eyes never leaving his former lieutenant. A coward? A man who let his second take everything he built? A man who chose his son over his pride? Winston switched to English, his accent thicker than Damon's. But you couldn't do that, could you? Even now, even with everything falling apart, you have to be the boss. I am the boss. You were the boss. Winston raised his weapon. Now you're just a man protecting a crippled child and a maid who doesn't belong in your world. Behind Damon, Isabella whispered, I can shoot. No, Damon said quietly. This is mine. He stepped forward, weapon raised. Winston's men shifted, ready to fire. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. You taught me everything, Damon said. How to read territory, how to manage operations, how to survive in this world. He paused. But you never learned the most important lesson. What lesson? Winston's finger tightened on the trigger. That power without purpose is just violence, and violence without purpose is just death waiting to happen. Philosophical until the end. Winston smiled coldly. Goodbye, Damon. The shot came from the left, one of Damon's flanking teams who'd circled through the shadows. It caught Winston in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. His men opened fire immediately, and the warehouse exploded into violence again. Damon grabbed Isabella and Rosa, pulling them behind a concrete pillar as bullets tore through the air. His men returned fire from cover positions, the tactical advantage shifting back to Damon's side. Winston was moving, wounded but functional, retreating toward a side exit. Damon pursued, leaving Isabella with his most trusted soldier. Protect them, he ordered. No matter what. He caught Winston in a narrow corridor between storage rooms. His former lieutenant leaned against the wall, blood spreading across his shirt, weapon still in hand. You should have let me go, Winston said, breathing hard. You targeted my family. Damon's voice was flat. There's no walking away from that. Your family? Winston laughed, the sound wet and pained. A dead wife, a broken son, and a maid you're falling in love with. That's not family, Damon. That's delusion. You're wrong. Damon stepped closer, weapon steady. They're more real than any loyalty you ever showed me. So kill me then. Prove you're still the ruthless boss everyone fears. Damon aimed center mass. His finger moved to the trigger. One squeeze and 8 years of betrayal would end in blood on concrete. But then he thought of Julian. Thought of the boy learning to speak, learning to trust, learning that the world could be more than pain and silence. Thought of what it would mean to return to his son with this particular blood on his hands. No, Damon said quietly. He lowered the weapon slightly. You don't get to make me the monster you needed me to be. He pulled out his phone with his free hand and made a call. It's done. Send the police. Winston's eyes widened. You're arresting me? I'm letting the system handle you. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, watching through bars while I rebuild everything you tried to take. Damon smiled without warmth. That's a better punishment than a bullet. By the time the corrupt cops on Damon's payroll arrived, the warehouse was secure. Jae Young's leadership lay dead on the floor, casualties of a territorial dispute that would be ruled self-defense. Winston was handcuffed and loaded into an unmarked car, headed for a federal detention that Damon's lawyers had already arranged. Rosa was injured but stable, already being treated by a medic Damon had brought. Isabella sat beside her mother, holding her hand, tears streaming silently down her face. Damon had taken a bullet to his left side, grazed but deep enough to bleed significantly. He'd taped it up hastily, ignoring the pain. Everything hurt less than the last 8 years had hurt anyway. Is it over? Isabella asked when he approached. It's over. Damon looked at Rosa. I'm sorry for what happened to you, ma'am. This was my fault. Rosa studied him with sharp eyes despite her injuries. You the mafia boss my daughter works for? Yes, ma'am. You love her? The question caught him off guard. Isabella's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. Damon paused, then decided on honesty. Yes, I think I do. Rosa nodded slowly. Then you better earn it. Because my daughter doesn't give her heart to men who don't deserve it. I know, Damon said quietly. I'll spend every day trying to deserve it. They left the warehouse as dawn broke over Brooklyn, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. Damon's empire had survived. The betrayal had been cut out, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something that almost resembled peace. But the real test waited at home, in a nursery where a small boy was about to teach his father the most important lesson of all. The penthouse was in chaos when they returned. The nurse met them at the door, her face pale. "He won't stop crying," she said. "He knows something's wrong. I've tried everything." Isabella pushed past her, ignoring her own exhaustion. Rosa was being settled in a guest room by the medic, and Damon followed behind, his side screaming with every step. They found Julian in his room, his small face red and tear-streaked, his body rigid with distress. The nurse stood helplessly nearby, wringing her hands. The moment Julian saw Isabella, everything stopped. His mouth opened in a silent sob of relief. "Bella," he managed through tears. "Bella back." She crossed the room in seconds, gathering him into her arms. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. I'm so sorry." Julian clung to her with surprising strength, his small hands fisting in her shirt. He was trembling, making sounds that weren't quite words but communicated everything. Fear, relief, desperate need. Then his eyes found Damon standing in the doorway. His father looked like he'd walked through hell. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandage on his side. His suit was torn and dirty. His face was drawn with pain and exhaustion. But his eyes were clear, focused entirely on his son. Julian's gaze moved between Isabella and Damon, processing, understanding somehow that they'd both come back, that they'd both survived whatever danger had taken them away. His mouth moved, struggling with a shape it had never made before. His hand reached toward Damon, trembling with effort. "App!" The sound caught in his throat. He tried again, his whole body straining with the effort. "Appa?" The word was small, imperfect, the most beautiful sound Damon had ever heard. His legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in the doorway, one hand pressed against his bleeding side, the other covering his mouth as a sob tore through him. "Appa," Julian said again, clearer this time. "Appa home." Damon crawled across the floor, undignified, desperate, completely beyond caring. When he reached his son's bed, Julian's small hand found his face, touching his cheek with infinite gentleness. "Appa stay?" Julian asked, his voice uncertain. "Yes." Damon's voice broke completely. "Yes, I'll stay. I promise. I'll always stay." Julian looked at Bella, then back to his father. "Family?" Isabella's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. "Family," Damon confirmed, pulling them both close. "We're family." They sat like that for a long time, Isabella holding Julian, Damon holding them both. The three of them tangled together in a moment that felt sacred despite the blood and violence that had preceded it. The nurse quietly left, closing the door behind her. Eventually, Julian fell asleep between them, exhausted from crying. His breathing evened out. Peaceful in a way it never had been before. One hand clutched Isabella's shirt, the other rested on Damon's arm. "We should get you to a hospital," Isabella whispered, eyeing the blood seeping through his bandage. "Later." Damon didn't move, didn't want to risk waking Julian. "This matters more. You're bleeding." "I've bled worse." He looked at her across their son's sleeping form. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for being exactly who he needed." "I didn't do it for thanks. I know. You did it for love." His hand found hers over Julian's chest. "That's what makes it matter." They stayed until the medic came to insist on treating Damon's wound properly. Isabella helped transfer Julian to his bed, tucking him in with Sora's journal beside his pillow. The boy stirred but didn't wake, his face finally relaxed. In the hallway, Isabella checked on her mother. Rosa was sleeping, her injuries cleaned and bandaged, her breathing steady. Isabella sat beside her for a few minutes, just watching her chest rise and fall, confirming she was real and alive. "You did good, baby," Rosa murmured without opening her eyes. That boy needs you, they both do. I know, Mama. So you staying? Isabella thought about Detroit, about the life she'd left behind, thought about this penthouse with its bulletproof glass and armed guards, its grief and healing happening in the same space. Thought about Julian saying her name, about Damon looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 3 years. Yeah, she said softly. I'm staying. 3 months later, the penthouse had transformed. Not in obvious ways. The bulletproof glass remained. The security protocols stayed in place, but the atmosphere had shifted from fortress to home. Toys scattered across the living room floor. Julian's artwork, messy finger paintings done with Isabella's help, hung on the refrigerator. Rosa's knitting supplies occupied one corner of the main room, and the sound of her humming gospel songs filled the space most afternoons. Julian was in physical therapy 4 times a week, working with a specialist who actually listened to Isabella's observations about what helped and what didn't. He was speaking in short sentences now, his vocabulary expanding daily. He'd never walk. The cerebral palsy was too severe. But he was learning to use mobility aids to navigate his world with increasing independence. More importantly, he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. On a Sunday afternoon in late spring, they went to Central Park. Damon pushed Julian's wheelchair, now decorated with stickers Julian had chosen himself. Everything from dinosaurs to spaceships. Isabella walked beside them, one hand resting on Rosa's arm. Her mother was still recovering, moving slower than before, but present and strong. The park was crowded with weekend families. Joggers passed on the paths. Street musicians played near the fountain. The air smelled like hot dogs and fresh-cut grass. They found a spot near the duck pond, and Julian's face lit up immediately. Look, Appa. He pointed with his whole arm, his excitement making his words tumble out fast. Bella, look, ducks. I see them, baby, Isabella said, crouching beside his chair. You want to feed them? Julian nodded enthusiastically. Damon handed Isabella a bag of seeds they'd brought, and she helped Julian scatter them toward the water. The ducks paddled closer, quacking and jostling for position. Julian's laughter rang out clear and bright, a sound that still made Damon's chest tight every time he heard it. He sounds like Sora when she laughed, Rosa observed quietly. You hear it? Damon nodded, throat suddenly tight. She would have loved seeing this. She is seeing it, Rosa said with certainty, and she's proud. Of him, of you, of what you're building here. Isabella glanced back at them, and the look she gave Damon held something that went beyond gratitude or friendship. It was deeper, more permanent, something that had grown slowly over 3 months of shared meals and late-night conversations, of watching Julian together and learning each other's stories, something that felt like home. You going to marry my daughter? Rosa asked bluntly. Damon nearly choked. Ma'am. Don't ma'am me, I got eyes. I see how you look at her. I see how she looks at you. Rosa's voice softened. Question is whether you're going to do right by her. I want to, Damon admitted, but my world? It's not safe. It's not what she deserves. What she deserves is a man who shows up, who stays, who loves her boy like he's his own. Rosa looked at him directly. You doing all that already? The rest is just paperwork. Julian called out again, wanting to move closer to the water. Isabella pushed his chair forward carefully, narrating everything they saw. Damon watched them, his son and the woman who'd saved them both, and felt something settle in his chest. 3 years ago, he'd stood in a hospital holding a newborn and watching his wife die. He'd thought that was the end of everything that mattered, that he'd spend the rest of his life managing an empire while drowning in grief. But Isabella had walked into his fortress with nothing but a suitcase and red cleaning gloves, and she'd taught him that endings could become beginnings, that silence could become speech, that walls could come down without everything collapsing. Appa, come see, Julian called, waving him over. Damon joined them at the water's edge. Julian pointed at a particularly bold duck that had waddled right up to the wheelchair. He likes me, Julian declared. Of course he does, Isabella said, ruffling his hair. What's not to like? Julian beamed. Then, with the casual certainty of a child who'd learned the world could be safe, he said, We're family, right, Appa? Right, Damon confirmed. He looked at Isabella over Julian's head. We're family. The moment stretched, simple and profound, ordinary and miraculous. Just a family in a park on a Sunday afternoon, feeding ducks and existing together in the space between what was and what could be. Rosa settled onto a nearby bench with her knitting, watching them with satisfaction. Love is showing up, she said to no one in particular. Every single day, Isabella added, meeting Damon's eyes. And Julian's laughter continued to ring across the water, the sound of healing made audible. In a city built on power, one man learned that real strength isn't found in fear or control. It's found in the courage to be vulnerable, to love without armor, and to protect what truly matters. Isabella wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a therapist. She was simply someone who refused to give up on a child everyone else had written off. And sometimes that's the only medicine that works. Damon didn't lose his power when he opened his heart. He found something stronger. Purpose. Not in territory or money, but in the small moments. A boy's first words. A woman's patient presence. A family built from broken pieces. In a world that tells us to be hard, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stay soft. To show up. To stay. To love when walking away would be easier. That's the real miracle. Not that Julian learned to speak, but that they all learned to hope again.